afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be on this planet. Welcome to another edition of Football Picks here on TalkingSports.tv. I'm your host, Marty York. I'm joined, as always, by our ace handicapper from his home office in San Diego this week, Uncle Ben Walderman from UncleBen'sFootball.com. And our other handicapper this week, handsome Howard Kamen, is on assignment. But there's lots to talk about, Ben, and here we are. We're entering Week 15 of the NFL season. 3 regular season games left, and we certainly have an idea by now as to who the contenders are for the Super Bowl championship and who the pretenders are. Like we know the Jets, for instance, and the Jaguars, they're not going anywhere. They're just playing out the season, and there's several teams in that category. One of those teams, surprisingly, is the Houston Texans. The Houston Texans, at the beginning of the season, were picked by several experts, including yourself, and I'm not trying to knock you or anything like this at this point, because many people thought the Houston Texans were going to be for real this season. You picked the Texans to meet the Seattle Seahawks in the Super Bowl. Certainly Seattle seems like they're on their way there, but the Texans have had a really, really disastrous season. Fired their head coach, Gary Kubiak, recently, as you predicted would happen a few weeks back. And let me ask you something, Uncle Ben. What do you make of the Houston Texans? Is it one of the most disappointing seasons a team has had in your recent memory?
Well, totally. I mean, you know, Marty, like I said, I predicted this team was going to be in the Super Bowl playing against the Seattle Seahawks back in August of this year. And certainly that didn't happen. But, yeah, like this team, what happened to this ball club? Gary Kubiak just lost it. Matt Schaub played horribly the first 8 games of the season before they turned the reins over to a rookie, undrafted rookie at that, Case Keenum. Now you got Wade Phillips taking over, Marty. You know, we've seen this act before type of thing. Wade never was a good head coach in Buffalo or in Dallas. Great defensive coordinator, though. You know, their defense is pretty strong. I got to say, it's hard to believe that a team with a defense that's this strong can actually lose 11 ball games in a row or whatever it's been. 10 ball games in a row, I think it's been. Yeah. So this team is just horrible. I think they've sort of thrown in the towel now. They're looking to draft a quarterback. Rumors out there they want to draft Teddy Bridgewater first. I mean, if that's what they think they need. Personally, I think they need a good head coach before they need a good quarterback because, you know, if you don't have a good head coach in this league, it's not going to happen for you. We've seen that time and time again, even with great personnel. And with poor personnel, good coaches can, you know, get more out of their people and actually turn them into a winner. So I don't know. The Houston Texans got a lot of work to do down there in the offseason. And it was just, like you said, it was just a horrible season, one of the worst collapses I've seen in many, many a year.
And on the other hand, Ben, the other team you chose back in August, the Seattle Seahawks, have done extremely well. Yes, they were beaten in San Francisco last week. They pushed on the spread. But the Seattle team is certainly for real. I'm going to guess that you're not changing your mind about Seattle and Russell Wilson and Marshawn Lynch and Pete Carroll and all the other first-rate members of this team. You still think that they're going to the Super Bowl?
Well, I do, Marty. I just think last week was a bit of a perfect scenario for the San Francisco 49ers. You know, they had the big win the week before. The Seahawks stood up in Seattle against New Orleans to basically perhaps secure the home field in the NFC Championship game if those two teams should meet in the NFC Championship game in January. And they lost 38-7, I believe, to the Seahawks way back in Week 3. So the scenario was really strong, and I think the Niners needed to say something if they're going to be a factor in the playoff picture, and they did it last week. But, you know, Seattle not only has a one-game cushion over New Orleans, although they did beat them, like we mentioned last week. So I don't see the Seahawks letting up here. I mean, they've got games. They're at the New York Giants this week. They've got Arizona at home and St. Louis at home. So I'm pretty sure they're going to get that home field advantage. But I think the New Orleans Saints might have something to say about the NFC before it's all said and done, about who's going to go to the Super Bowl. But I do think that home field advantage in Seattle is really worth a lot to them, and I see them going to the Super Bowl from the NFC side.
And you mentioned that Seattle is in New York this weekend to face the Giants. The line makers have made them 7-point favorites. I don't think it's going to budge very much from that. I know that they're not this game is not on your hot list. We'll get to your best picks later in the program, as we always do. But do you have any thoughts at all about Seattle facing the Giants this week and laying 7?
Well, like our friend Handsome Howard says, you're never as good as you look, and you're never as bad as you look. And we chatted before the broadcast today, Marty, and you mentioned how the New York Giants last week, they looked absolutely horrible. So you got to expect they're going to play, somewhat better. But that's not really a hard thing to do after what we witnessed last week. So they should show a little better colors this week. But Seattle's going to be an angry bunch now, and like I said, they only have that 1-game cushion now over the Saints. Although they do own the tiebreaker, but they still have to get the job done. The Seattle Seahawks. They don't want to give up what they've worked so hard to attain this season. And I see the Seahawks winning this game. Winners are covering about 83% of the time this year. 7 points in New York. I mean, the consensus, and we're going to talk about that, coming up shortly about consensus betting. A lot of people, 69% of the public is on Seattle right now, which I don't really particularly like that much when the numbers turn in that high. But I got to see the Seahawks winning this game, Marty. Winners tend to cover the point spread, so I'd have to side with the Seahawks coming off a loss going into New York, even though the Giants should put up a better effort this week.
But this is not one of your best bets. Let's make that clear.
It isn't. But the Giants really have nothing to play for.
Yeah.
And I think Seattle's defense, Eli Manning should have a tough day there against the secondary of the Seattle Seahawks.
Folks, you're watching Football Picks here on TalkingSports.tv. I'm Marty York. I'm based in Toronto, Canada, and I'm chatting with Uncle Ben Walderman of UncleBen'sFootball.com. You can check out all Uncle Ben's picks at his site, UncleBen'sFootball.com. He is in San Diego, where his home office is located. And the Chargers played the Giants last week. They didn't look bad. But let's talk about some of the long shots that you see at this moment, Uncle Ben, perhaps emerging triumphant in their divisions and maybe even making it to the Super Bowl. Any team in that category right now for you? Well,
yeah, the playoff picture's starting to shape up. Basically, it's pretty much decided in the AFC. It's a little clearer, I should say. It's not decided. It's a little clearer in the AFC. Although the Jets still believe they could still get in. I mean, they are in the picture as long as San Diego, but I don't see it. It's going to come down to probably the Miami and Baltimore. One of those teams is going to make it. Probably one of those teams isn't, because Kansas City's 10-3 and Baltimore and Miami are already 7-6. So they're not going to catch the Chiefs on a wild card situation. But the team that I really like this year, who could be possibly, like you said, somewhat of a dark horse coming out of the AFC. Obviously, people are on Denver and New England, although I don't think New England's going to get it done this year. But the Cincinnati Bengals, Marty, could possibly be a team that could, maybe come up, not out of nowhere. Obviously, the Bengals are a very competitive ball club this year, 9-4, and I think they've won 7 of their last 9 ball games, and their 2 losses have come in overtime. So, they're competitive in every game they play, and that's the kind of situation you want going into the playoffs. It's a confident bunch there. Now, they're playing the Steelers this week, and then they're finishing with a couple of home games against Minnesota and Baltimore. So I don't know if that game's going to mean anything to Cincinnati last week, but might mean something to Baltimore. But I just see the Bengals being a pretty well coached. Andy Dalton's starting to show some experience. They're not turning the ball over. Their defense is pretty solid. They're not injured a whole bunch, this ball club. So, there's a team that I think could come out of the AFC.
Okay.
On the other side, it's much more on the NFC side. Well, Seattle and New Orleans pretty much look like the class acts of the NFC so far. They're 11-2 and 10-3 respectively. Philadelphia's leading their division at 8-5. Detroit's leading their division at 7-6. So I don't see them being up in the echelon of the Hawks and the New Orleans. But the only dark horse I could possibly see coming out of this, and it's not the Carolina Panthers, it's going to have to be, I think, the San Francisco 49ers.
Right.
Okay? Because this year they're a dark horse. Last year they were the favorites. Not so much the case. Colin Kaepernick hasn't looked good. Their defense is starting to ratchet it up a bit, and that's how you win the playoffs. You run the ball and you stop the run. If you can do that in the NFL playoffs, you get a chance to succeed. So my dark horses would have to be San Francisco and Cincinnati, Marty.
You know what, Uncle Ben? I was going to ask you about Carolina because Yes, they got slaughtered last week. Did not look good in New Orleans. But aside from that game, throw that game out, and they've looked very solid. Cam Newton at quarterback, to me, he's matured now. He runs when he has to. He looks to throw first. Got a bullet of an arm. And the Panthers' defense, I don't think there are many better teams in the NFL with better defensive units, I should say, in the NFL than what Carolina has. Can Cam Newton and Carolina do any damage, or you sound like you're writing them off? And so then the question is, why?
Well, I think that it's just, I think they need to get a little experience in the heat. I think they're going to make the playoffs, this team, but I think they're going to lose out because they're playing against seasoned teams that have been in the playoffs pretty much. And I think that, there's a little growth that needs to take place at that level that, once you get into the postseason. And I think that Cam Newton needs to experience that before he can take his team up to the next level. They've got a tough game this week against the New York Jets, I can tell you, because I think the Jets match up very well against this team. They both like to run the ball, these teams. They play solid defenses. We're going to get into that later. This is one of my selections, but I think that's going to be a tough game for them this week. Then they got the Saints coming up, the very next week, Carolina. On your point of the Panthers, that will really show their mettle. Okay, they went into New Orleans, like you said last week, and they really looked quite out of sync, and New Orleans took it to them pretty good. Next week, New Orleans goes into Carolina. We'll see what they can do there, Marty, before we pass judgment on the Carolina Panthers.
All right, Uncle Ben, great stuff. We're going to take a little break. When we return, we're going to talk about a very unusual trend that you've spotted in the NFL when it comes to wagering this week. And we'll get to that right after this. I'm Marty York, Uncle Ben in his home office in San Diego, California. And don't go away. We'll be right back.